Welcome back, everybody. It has been a little while here. We go a couple months on and then take a little bit of time off. So we're starting up a new series of Vetted VA Live, and tonight is an important one. If you are anywhere on social media and you follow any mortgage, real estate, appraiser, title person, anyone tangentially related to real estate and on social media has had their say on what the NAR settlement on commissions means for buyers, sellers, professionals, anyone in the business. So tonight we're going to take a unique look at it because here at Vetted VA, we're talking about veteran buyers and sellers, and the VA guidelines have an interesting perspective on this. What is important for you guys to know? This is an informal conversation. I've got two realtors. I've got two, including myself, two mortgage professionals here. There's a lot that we know, but it's almost at this point, there's even more that we don't know. And this settlement is not final, still has to be approved by the court. The DOJ has to sign off on it and make sure they don't want any changes. But we know for certain there are significant changes coming down the pike in the near future. And that is going to impact veterans more and differently than almost anyone else. So that's what we're here to go through tonight. But it's important to remember anyone's videos you're watching here, no one has perfect insight and clarity because all of this is still really to shake out and be settled out. So from that perspective, let's go through our crew tonight. We've got Brandy Brickler in Texas, a loan officer like myself, Sarah Acevedo Schwacker, and Sarah, you're in Chicago. Realtor on that side of the equation is going to help us understand what this means for buyers and sellers using the VA financing. And then Claudia Overson, also here in Southern California, like me, out in Apple Valley. So welcome, and thank you, ladies, for joining us tonight. I almost want to start the conversation with what it is that we do know. We've talked about there's still some uncertainty here. Claudia, you want to kind of start with the two big things that are in the settlement that if they don't get changed are significantly going to change the way real estate transactions work and how VA buyers need to be prepared for it.
So the two main elements are having to do with compensation being on the MLS, which is traditionally how a buyer's agent knows what the compensation will be for selling that particular listing. So in the settlement, it was proposed that no compensation whatsoever will be discussed on the MLS. It won't be shown in the remarks as a checkbox or anything like that. And then the next one is that we will all be required to have a buyer sign a buyer broker agreement prior to showing them property. Now, this is for realtors, which realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors. So there are salespeople and then there's realtors. So this does apply to realtors. So that's a big one as well. The buyer broker compensation, buyer broker agreement. Those are the two key components that are going to have an influence.
Well, let's start with the first part of it because I don't. Absent compensation and how that works, it's really hard to understand what's all going to go into this buyer broker agreement. Sarah, traditionally, if we go back the last 50 years, a seller wants to sell their home and they offer it for sale, and a buyer and their agent go out and find the property and everyone comes to an agreement. How has compensation traditionally worked so that we can kind of set the framework for what is likely to be very different going forward?
Sure. So in the past, I haven't been around for 50 years, but in the past, and what we have seen is that compensation is negotiated with the seller typically. So the listing agent and the seller come up with a percentage that the seller is willing to pay and the listing agent is willing to receive. The seller pays the selling brokerage a commission, and that brokerage usually offers a percentage to whoever brings in the buyer. So commission has always been negotiable. This is not new, and this lawsuit surely doesn't change that a whole lot from what I can tell. It's really about the reporting of it and how it is presented to consumers as well. So it's more transparent, if you will.
That is the exact word, Sarah, that I was going to say. It's from the DOJ has been behind the scenes. There's been a number of lawsuits between different groups in different states. And when all of these lawsuits are happening across the country in different states, it can be problematic. So the Department of Justice, being nationwide, is looking at this and saying, we don't want these settled out different ways and different agreements among other states. But what they want is more transparency and a decoupling of the buyer's agent compensation from the seller compensation. So there, we have the transparency in that people said, well, buyers agents don't know how their agent is being paid. Buyers don't know how their agent is being paid. Therefore, they don't negotiate on it. So it benefits realtors in that there's this set amount, which, Sarah, as you already said, it's not truly set in stone, but some people believe that, and it is not transparent. So the second piece of that, which is really important about what Claudia said, that we can't have it in the MLS anymore, to say if there's 3 houses for sale, one's offering a 3% commission to the buyer's agent, one's offering 2%, and one is offering a 0.5%. When that is out in the open, there is a possibility for agents to steer their clients to the property that offers them the most compensation. So those are the two big things that the lawsuits we're seeking to address, and sort of what the Department of Justice wants to have happen in the end result of this. So on the mortgage side, and for this space, we are talking to veterans. Most veterans choose to use their VA mortgage benefit, and that changes things and makes it a little bit interesting, because going forward, if they can't be coupled together, if we can't have one commission that is offered to be split between 2 brokerages, now we've opened up a whole can of worms of how do we pay that buyer's agent? Who can pay it? If we can't disclose it in the MLS, a whole bunch of ideas there. But Brandy, why don't you walk us through? There's this idea, and one of the ways that this could work out is that buyers would pay their own agents. And everyone goes, well, that sounds good, but there's a little bit of a problem on the VA side with that. How about you walk us through what the VA guidelines say about a veteran using their VA mortgage benefit paying their agent?
Sure. So real estate in general is the biggest driver of wealth of the average person. And paying your seller and buyer through your proceeds from your sale is the easiest way for you to compensate your agent rather than coming up for the money. Now, if you're a buyer and you're a first-time home buyer, the VA has you covered as far as 0 down payment. You don't have to make that payment. But now that your agent is not being compensated from the seller, then we have a big problem. We have a gap of like what you would need to come up with. What's really interesting is that some ideas out there are that, hey, we could do this through seller concessions. And there are some real big rules out there about how much seller concession can be offered. So there's rules for each loan type of how that can be done. And it is a larger amount for veterans. We can get up to 6% in seller concessions. But still, agent commission would probably cover, obviously most of that.
And when we look at it, the way the VA guidelines read currently, it says fees or commissions charged by a real estate agent or broker in connection with a VA loan may not be charged to or paid by the veteran purchaser. The second piece of it is kind of funny and tells you how this has been looked at historically. And it says, while use of buyer brokers is not precluded, veteran purchasers may not under any circumstances be charged a brokerage fee or commission in connection with the services. So since information on property available for purchase and financing options is widely available to the public from a variety of sources, the VA does not believe that preventing the veteran from paying buyer broker fees will harm the veteran. And that kind of goes back to the last 50 years of the way this has gone. Yeah, you don't have to, because 98% of the transactions go through the MLS with a cooperative commission structure, and it's already been allocated. So again, we don't know exactly how this is going to shake out, but Claudia, Sarah, I know that every real estate brokerage has been having meeting after meeting, the NAR, the local boards. This is what we know. This is what we think is going to happen. So this will all supposedly be in place by July. And that doesn't sound, it's not very long. I mean, we're talking 90 days, 100 days away. It's a long time, but it's not a long time when you're talking about, talking about turning the Titanic here. You can't just turn on a dime and go, hey, we're going to do things differently. But Claudia, what are you hearing from NAR, from local board, of what you can expect when you're taking a listing in July? I'm assuming as of today, you can do it the way you've always done it, but sometime in the next 90 to 100 days, you're going to have to do it differently. What does that listing agreement with the seller look like? And what should sellers know about buyer compensation and what they need to be prepared to engage in when those negotiations start?
Well, it's I actually just watched a live stream not too long ago. It was the NAR president, and really our listing agreements are possibly going to change because there's going to be new rules in effect, but as we don't know yet what's going to change on that. That's the whole thing about that. Right now, my job as a listing agent is to negotiate with the seller, and based on that, our forms in California, we tell them that we compensate the buyer's agent through our commission that we've already negotiated. So that really isn't going to change that much, at least not for me on my listings. And it's really going to come down to explaining to the seller the importance of having a buyer's agent. Some sellers are not okay with a dual agency. That means when the same broker represents both sides of the transaction. Some states allow it and some states do not. So I think as of right now, I mean, it's still going to be the same conversation about compensation, and we're still going to I'm still going to share that with the buyer's agent, because I know as a buyer's agent myself, it is very important to have buyer's agent representing the other side so that both sides are completing the transaction legally, with everything that's required, and as easy a process as possible.
Well, I failed in my hosting duties here to mention that our main purpose here is to answer your questions. If you're watching and you have questions related to the settlement, related to your realtor, related to your lender, we're here to answer those questions. But despite me failing to solicit questions, we've got a couple of good ones here. So I actually want to jump into the first one here. Says the settlement states that the amount indicated in the buyer broker agreement is the only amount an agent can collect, regardless of what the seller is willing to pay. If a VA buyer can pay zero, buyer broker will reflect zero, and thus now, according to the new rules, a buyer agent representing a VA buyer won't be able to collect a commission. How can we advocate for VA buyers if no one will want to represent them with no payment? So I'm going to lead off. You guys, we can put it back up. If you guys look over in the comment section of Streamer, it's kind of a long one. I don't want to leave it up because it's blocking you guys' faces while it's up. But take a look at it because it's a good and it's a detailed question. That buyer broker agreement, I believe, can explicitly state, and let me, before we go any further into it, this is conjecture on all of our parts because we don't know. We're still 90 to 100 days away from it being out in the real world. So we're going to preface everything we say tonight with, to the best of our understanding, and we're going to find out over the next 100 days how this is really going to work out. But that buyer broker agreement can say, you're a veteran, you can't pay this. I will represent you, and this is my compensation expected, and we're agreeing or acknowledging that it has to come from the seller or someone other than you. But what we're also going to talk about here in a second, there's already some pretty big advocacy going on behind the scenes to change the VA guidelines, because clearly what we just read you, the VA has policies based on 50, 60 years of precedent and history of the way things are done. When it's not allowed to be done that way, it has to adjust. So the question is, the VA and the government moves more slowly than industry does. And we're saying that the NAR and realtors across the country are going to have a heck of a time getting this all done and changed in 100 days. The VA is not going to change this in 100 days. So we may have a window where this is problematic in exactly the way this shakes out. But Sarah, you want to comment on what that question was and the ideas they're throwing out?
I think it'll be tricky. I mean, for now, we're still trying to figure it out. We're trying to brainstorm exactly how we can best represent our veterans and anyone using their VA entitlement. It's tricky. One process that I heard that I think is going to be a good one would be, yes, we're representing VA buyers and we need to have a buyer representation agreement. The other caveat is normally when I use these buyer representation agreements with my veteran clients, I always enter 0 for the commission. It is what it is. However, moving forward, that's not something that we'll be able to do because the amount on the buyer broker agreement is going to come into question and into play once we are in the transaction. So
It's binding once you put that on there, right? Is that what I'm understanding?
Are you talking about the buyer broker agreement? It's not binding.
Yes.
I think that was part of the question. Permission is
Sarah,
always negotiable.
Sarah, I don't want to interrupt you. I just don't want to get too far down that road when some people watching, we didn't go. We talked about this buyer broker agreement is now being mandated. If you're a realtor and you're working hard, it is now mandated. So explain to us first what it is and why it was optional and not that common, less often used than not. But walk us through what it is and how and why we're looking at it being mandatory now.
Sure. I mean, it is an agreement between a agent and their client. It is an agreement that states, I work for you. These are the things that I'm willing to do for you. There is a fee for my services. And if at any time you're not happy with my services, then you can ask to be let out of that agreement in writing. I've personally not been a fan of that form, so I have not used it in many, many years. I've actually never used that document up until recently. I've started to use it. I have to use it now. But I'm not holding anyone hostage either. If you don't want to work with me, you're free to move on to someone else. That's okay. Different strokes for different folks kind of a thing. But now it is mandatory. Yeah, you're right. We do have to use that. So for our VA clients, it'll get a little trickier and we'll have to negotiate them a little differently.
So being here in California, I've seen more of the California Association of Realtors stuff. So Claudia, that buyer broker agreement that we have here, one of the things that many of the agents that I work with have been super clear to point out, because just like Sarah, like most agents that I work with are not fans of this because most people that were using it to bind a buyer to them for either a specific property or more often a period of time. So the realtors that I deal with were like, I don't want that. I don't want to do that, but I have to have this portion that talks about my compensation. So Claudia, do you maybe want to talk about what other things in there, such as time constraints, property specificity? It can be as tight or as loose as you and your agent want as a buyer, except it cannot be loose around how that person expects to be paid, is my understanding. Is how does it actually work out in our forms here, Claudia?
So every state is going to have their own form for that. Some states do require that. California doesn't require it. And it really hasn't been a standard of practice for a lot of agents. I'm like Sarah myself. I don't like to have it signed because I feel the same way. If somebody wants to work with me, they'll work with me. I don't want them to feel obligated, but our current form, it does have an expiration date. So there is a timeline of when you start, when it ends. It does have it does explain who's going to pay the buyer's broker. So there's a section called accounting for payments to broker by others. And then there's also a section where it's authorizing the buyer broker to receive the compensation in the MLS. So in California, that's already addressed. A lot of agents, like I said, I don't do this form, but I know that some agents will probably do it at a higher percentage and then accept whatever's offered in the MLS. I've also heard of some agents expecting the buyer to make up the difference if they have it at, let's say, a 3%, and in the MLS it's only being offered at a 2%, then they'll ask the buyer to make up that 1% difference. Every agent is an independent contractor. How you run your business is up to you. Me personally, I don't subscribe to that kind of business model. If I do a good job, I deserve to be paid for it. If it's less than what it is, then that's what it is. To be honest, I also, my business model allows for me to reduce commissions for veterans and for first responders. So again, that's why my opinion is a little bit different than a lot of other agents, I think.
We've got a couple of questions here and a couple of good comments. This is really more of a comment, but a buyer broker agreement is a great tool. Montana is one of 19 states that have been using it, but it doesn't fit for VA buyers in these new guidelines. That is 100% correct. And what I think is really important. So I've done this, as hard as it is to believe with this baby face, but I've done this for 29 years. In 29 years, the California Association of Realtors, I believe, has changed the contract 132 times. But the magic part about that is that they have really good lawyers. And anytime there is a flaw in that contract, it gets addressed. And flaw, not in the sense of locking a buyer or a seller or anyone into it, but making sure that it is clear in the language so that a realtor doesn't have someone come back and say, hey, I signed this and I thought it meant this, but I'm reading it and I think it means this. So I don't think Illinois lawyers that work for their association of realtors are all that different. They're all really good, and they are very good at being clear on what is to be expected. So I think these buyer broker agreements are going to get amended. We've talked about the VA guidelines getting amended to account for this new normal. So anyone preaching today and saying it's going to be X, Y, and Z, and these are going to be the changes, there's really no way for us to know that.
So and I also want to add to that, though. So besides the buyer broker agreement, which is between the buyer and the buyer's agent, there's also the seller payment to buyer's broker. So in our purchase contracts, if the buyer's agent is wanting to be compensated differently than what is offered in the MLS, you would mark that in the purchase contract to let them know that this form is included. And then that form has other it states whatever is in the buyer broker agreement. So if in the buyer broker agreement it says the 3%, and in the MLS it says the 2%, the seller payment to buyer's broker form is what we would send along with the listing to let the seller know that we're requesting a higher or a different commission than what's offered because of the buyer broker agreement that we have. So again, I mean, I know a lot of people don't like California, but we got things covered pretty good.
But that's going to change too, am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody's going to have a buyer broker agreement.
No, I meant the part where agents can no longer have the buyer pay the difference between what's on the MLS, kind of like in this scenario that you created. So now it's going to be where even if your buyer representation agreement says 3%, you're still getting the 2% that's being offered, and that's it.
Yeah, I think so. That is correct. Going back to the live stream that I saw with the NAR president, they did go over that, and he did say that you're not going to be able to collect the difference in that. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was referring to. Sorry, that's what I was referring to. I don't think they're going to let agents get the difference anymore. Yeah. So really, it's going to be up to the agents to put the right amounts in the buyer broker agreements, even if you're okay with taking a little less. I think that we're almost forced to keep it high so that we have some negotiation room later on with the seller.
That's true.
Also, I want to address the transparency of it, because I'm not sure why there's this idea that the new way of removing the commission percentage from the MLS is somehow being more transparent. It's not, because right now, all of those real estate websites that you visit, Zillow, Realtor.com, Redfin, they all show what the buyer agency percentage is. If you take that away, nobody's going to know what you're getting, what the buyer's agent is getting paid, not even the buyer's agent. So another item that the NAR president covered was that, if a broker wants to have that shown on our website, you can do that. So It can't be
Ooh.
in the MLS, but you could have it like on, let's say, coldwellbanker.com. If it's our in-house listing, we could do that for our listing. We can't do that for other brokers' listings. So that
And
was something that was discussed also.
we could probably go all night on that topic
Yeah.
because all of this is talking about what you can do inside the multiple listing service. So
Mhm.
every time there's a change, we could all sit here and list out, there are some really good things in here that I think are positive changes. But anytime you have positive changes, you don't really know the unintended consequences. And one of the potential proposed, thought through unintended consequences here is the MLS could die. So Claudia just mentioned, hey, Coldwell Banker puts the percentage on. Well, there could be third-party sites that are not associated with realtors, that are not limited to membership, and they can say, we'll advertise your listing and you can see what the compensation is here, and we can be super clear on it. And if you look in other countries around the world, that's more common. Rather than a multiple listing service controlled by the board of realtors, there's a public service that is a cost that they run these ads. Almost they're similar to the portals that we have here, but their whole purpose is to take and run those ads. There is a path, which you have to see how this plays out. There's a path where you could see the MLS going away and people who are realtors. So here, let's actually go back, because I want to circle back to this question. Claudia, Sarah, either one of you, I keep hearing realtor. Are all real estate agents realtors? And whichever of you answer this, why does that matter in the context of this discussion and what is changing? So either one of you, what is a realtor, and are all real estate agents impacted by these changes?
Go for it, Claudia.
Well, I did mention that earlier. So a realtor is a member of the National Association of Realtors, where it's a trade association. And basically, when anybody can get a real estate license and be a salesperson, be an agent. But in order to be a realtor, you do have to pass, certain things like your code of ethics. We have a certain code of ethics that we follow. We're held to a higher standard than a salesperson. So I really believe that it's
Protecting the consumer.
Yeah, protecting the consumer, putting the client above ourselves. And I think just, having been licensed now for 18 years, you really do see a lot of things and a lot of situations where you kind of scratch your head and think like, why would that person think that that's okay to do? But with the code of ethics in place, there's an entity that holds you accountable.
And that really is what this lawsuit was about, because there's a trade group who collectively sets policies. That trade group and brokerages that hire realtors, they were sued by buyers and sellers who said, we were damaged by this system that you guys collectively set policies. So now you're in a situation where this only applies to realtors. You could be a real estate agent, and if I don't join NAR, I don't put my listings in the multiple listing service, this doesn't affect me at all. It truly only affects those that are members of the NAR and are realtors. So that's
I don't think that many things. I don't think that many things are actually really going to change as far as the rules and guidelines, because what we're talking about here specifically is that we're not trying to put veterans in a position where they're discriminated against because of the way that their loan or purchase has to be structured.
And Brandy, I don't know what your thoughts are, but we've seen changes come before, and those unintended consequences, once they become apparent, if this goes through the way that we think that it will, veterans can't pay their realtor. Veterans are therefore disadvantaged when they're out and competing against non-VA financing. The VA will fairly rapidly adjust. So the question becomes, what is rapidly in the minds of the VA? Is this a change that happens by the end of the year? Is it something that takes years to change?
Well, I don't think that the Veterans Administration, we're all very, this group specifically has a lot of communication with higher ups at the Veterans Administration. We know that there's a decision coming down the line, but it would not be prudent of the Veterans Administration to amend the VA handbook or the guidelines for this based on something that has not been signed off by the DOJ. So that just absolutely cannot happen. So unfortunately, I don't know that we'll see a definitive decision come before this has actually become law.
So going back to that live stream that I saw, they did address VA buyers, and the NAR president did mention that they have had conversations with leadership
The
at the
Veterans Commission.
VA, and that they're having conversations with the GOJ, and that it's not something that's going to happen immediately, and because it is a government entity, it is going to take a while, and it was suggested that if there's not a decision by the time that this becomes the new rules, that we should write our commission into the offer, which is really contradictory because in the past we have been told that the purchase agreement is a contract between the buyer and the seller. You don't discuss commission in that because it's not part of the offer. So now there's contradictory information being put out. And I think that's where a lot of agents have questions because it's not clear how we're going to move forward. And it's clear on others. Yes, we'll negotiate with the buyer broker agreement, but it's not clear with VA buyers. And we're not going to stop working with veterans and military just because a clear direction isn't in place.
That would definitely put them at their offer at a disadvantage if you are having to write your commission into that offer for the seller to actually consider.
And you know what's concerning, and I found this out while I was doing some research, HUD doesn't even have military status as a protected class.
Not in all states. I think it is a protected class in some states.
It's in some states. I know in California it is, but HUD, which is a federal agency, that's really where it should be. And they don't have it. So that's concerning to me.
Yeah. Can I just say something about writing in the commission on the contracts? Because I've heard the same thing. And I know that we went through an entire lawsuit and so much speculation because really that's what's out there. So if people gain nothing else from tonight's video, just understand that there's a lot of speculation out there. Everyone is wondering, and there's downright fake news. So I'd like to know where all the fact checkers are right now, because there's a lot of fake news out there around the settlement. And really, it's causing a lot of confusion amongst the very people that it has set out to protect. So oxymoron all the way around. Anyway, what I think is going to happen with VA buyers, at least in the short term, may be that agents have to write that commission into the contract and again, get the seller to pay for it. Buyers aren't going to pay for it. So really, this is going to look exactly as how business has been done, where the seller pays for the buyer's agent. But this way, it's happening directly. So now the seller is directly paying the buyer's agent, whereas currently what has been happening is seller pays the seller's agent pays the buyer's agent. That's what we've been doing. It's just going to be switched around a little bit to just be shown a different way, but that's how it's going to have to be handled for VA buyers.
Were you going to say something, Brandy?
I was going to say that poses an interesting question for one, about the actual offer price that people are offering. Like, is that going to change what the offer price is for the buyer? Are they going to offer something different if they're going to ask for compensation for their agent?
I think it really boils down to what the asking price is. I mean, did they initially put in an asking price that takes into consideration that commission is not a part of it?
Yeah, that really messes up your comps, though.
It absolutely does. I think it's going to be a short-term nightmare for sure.
I think that's part of the misconception that's been put out there, that somehow an agent commission determines market value. It doesn't. An appraiser has never gone and asked, how much commission did you pay on this? And then said, I'm going to adjust up or down because of the commission. So
they do on seller concessions, though, actually, right? They do consider seller concessions.
Let's talk about seller concessions, because there has been a discussion where the borrower's funds, right? Concessions have been considered the borrower's funds, and you don't use borrower's funds to pay for real estate commissions or transaction coordinator fees. So why would you use any of the concessions to cover commission?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Those are like the types of things that the VA needs to clear, like they need to confirm and clarify.
Well, right now, I
Let
think it's
me-
written in that it says if it does not harm the veteran, and we are clearly in a path where like the changes could in fact harm a veteran.
let
Well,
me,
I mean, you shouldn't be using like concessions right now to pay for commissions.
Agreed.
the answer to this question is unclear. So I'm asking you guys, with the knowledge that you have, I'm going to throw a hypothetical out here and tell me how you guys would answer this. Let's say we go to August 1. So July has come. These rules are in place. The VA has not changed anything. I'm a veteran buyer. I have to sign a buyer broker agreement if I'm going to use a realtor. What do you write in there as your compensation? I mean, we can say it has to come by the seller, right? Do we have to write in there that your compensation will have to come from the seller because me, the veteran, can't pay for it?
I guess
That's
it could be written in.
because I don't know what the buyer broker form is going to be like. If it's still the same form, then it's already addressed.
Perhaps.
In what way?
In the way that it's already says who's going to pay that, and if there is a compensation, we would have to call the listing agent and ask them what they're offering, or it might be if it's an in-house deal, like it's the same company that has the listing, you would already know if it's being offered or not. So like these are all the little things that we really don't know until we know if first the proposed settlement is accepted and how NAR wants us to move forward with that, because the associations are going to have to change how we disclose compensation.
I think, Josh, that those buyer representation agreements automatically state that the buyer would be paying that commission, but it's really easy to just scratch that off and just maybe write something that says agent will negotiate seller to pay this fee or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
because
then when you go present that offer, you know that you can't get paid from me. So you have to ensure that your compensation is covered, or
That's
you're
right.
working for free.
That's right. I mean, we are going to protect our clients. You know, it's easy for me and it's easy for Claudia to sit here and say, hey, we're going to protect our clients. And no, we're going to fight and make sure that our clients are not paying our commission. But that's not how other agents out there will do it. We see it in the group where buyers are paying agent commissions on the side outside
Transaction
of
fees.
closing via Zelle and all kinds of madness. You know, that shouldn't be the case at all. But the goal would always be to get the seller to pay for it.
I think so far we've done a pretty good job of covering what we know and also making clear that there is a lot of unknown. And in the next 90 to 100 days, it's going to get more clear. And we'll probably do this next rotation. We'll come back and say, what do we know now? After it'll get a lot more clear from that perspective.
So I just want to clarify, Sarah's in Chicago, I'm in California.
Mhm.
If nothing were to change in our forms, we do have the ability to include this in our offer and say, I want the seller to pay me 2.5% or whatever it is. So in California, that would still be the case. We won't know what's offered, but we can still send our request in.
Mhm.
So separate from how that is all going to work, I want to have, we got 10, 15 minutes here left. A part of the discussion that I would like to have, everyone has a theory out there on what this is going to do. It's going to bring prices down. It's going to make it cheaper for sellers. It's going to make it cheaper for buyers. It's going to make it more expensive for buyers. Why don't we each take a moment to kind of share our perspective on how this might work out? Brandy, do you think this is something that can help your buyers, non-veteran or veteran buyers, where they're going to save money on the house or save money on closing costs? Is there a way that this is a positive?
I don't think so. I think that largely things are going to operate exactly as they are operating now. It really makes sense. When you sit down and you think about it, it really makes sense for this buyer's agent and seller's agent to be compensated from a seller's equity, because that is where the most money is, right? And then as you're selling and buying, and if you're understanding how the process works, you say, hey, I'm not going to pay the buyer's agent. Great, that's fine. But now you're going to buy again. You're going to pay the buyer's agent. You're still going to be paying a commission. So if you understand how it works, then you would see that largely, in fact, it's probably going to work exactly the same way as far as the negotiation. Plus, we don't want to put the veteran in a disadvantaged situation for making an offer or selling their home or, buying a home.
And just before we can finish going around the horn, I want to say for you guys watching at home, before these ladies give you an answer, I can tell you, I can agree or disagree with either one of them. And the way that I know this is I've read 50 opinions from really smart people that follow this industry, and every one of them you can go, yeah, that's correct, or no, that could be. It's like there's not a right answer. So again, we're just going through of what we're seeing and how we expect this may shake out. Sarah, from your perspective, does this impact prices up or down, buyers, sellers, anyone saving money, any winners and losers in this?
I do not think that this is going to affect prices. The market is what it is. And what we have seen in the last couple of years continues to be the case, which is low inventory and high buyer demand. Not as high as during the COVID or the pandemic, but we still have high buyer demand. I think that the losers here, unfortunately, is going to be the buying public, because people are uninformed. People might simply get their information from headlines, and we know that headlines are just what's clickbait, right? A lot of these headlines are clickbait. They're definitely inaccurate. I think I saw agent commissions are going away or something like that. Commissions are not going away unless agents are going away altogether. But I think that it is how agents are getting paid that's changing. That's what's changing, how it's reported, the transparency to the public. Prices are not changing. There may be less agents that are in the industry because, while it is easy to get into the industry, it's not easy to stay in this industry. It's also really expensive to keep up. But I think it's the buyers who are going to be confused, not know how this works. I hope that people do reach out to agents and just sit down and be educated and see be informed, be educated and be informed. That's the best I can give you, so that you're armed with tools when you go out into the marketplace. There is a way to work all of this out. It will all get sorted. Everyone should have their representation. One thing we didn't mention is that before, I believe it was 1996, buyers didn't have representation. And the DOJ is exactly who wanted buyers to have representation. So there was an entire lawsuit and buyer representation came into play. It used to be that even when agents represented buyers, they were still a sub-agent of the sellers. So technically, those agents were still working for sellers, even though they were helping buyers buy homes. Okay, so now we've put some more ambiguity around the buyer representation, which is unfortunate. Buyers also should have their representation. They will continue to have representation. And even if you think that you can't afford it, do understand that it can be negotiated in the contract on your behalf.
That's important. Yeah, that's super important to mention.
Yeah. So I just want people to know that they have options out there. They don't need to go at this alone. You also don't have to run over to the listing agent because, again, they are working for the seller. And in a lot of states, dual agency is not, it's not legal. So the agent would just represent the seller and you would simply be an unrepresented party to the transaction.
Well, Claudia, maybe you can speak on that because I know the California Association of Realtors has a fancy new form for representation. If you go directly to the seller's agent and say, I want you to write up the offer, that new CAR form flat out says they are not representing you as an agent, even if there's terminology in the forms you are signing that would indicate that they may be your agent. They are representing solely the seller. And then again, this is where we talk about CAR has good realtors. They've probably seen a lawsuit or two and they go, how do we prevent this? We state really clearly, you can go to the seller's agent, but at this point in California, the way the contract is written, they can't be your agent. They are helping you work your way through the transaction, but they're absolutely not your agent. Like Sarah, you were saying, a sub-agent, there's just one agent. There's only one side of representation there. Claudia, you feel pretty similarly to Brandy and Sarah, or other thoughts?
I think that this is not going to be good for buyers. Personally, I just don't. I've seen too many cases where the listing agent is representing both sides and really just taking advantage of the situation. If there's consumers out there who think that the seller is going to drop, the price on their house $10,000 or let them have an additional $10,000, I don't think that there's anybody that generous out there to just give away their equity that way unless there's a reason to. So it's not going to make prices go down. It's just there's so many myths out there about how this is what's happening here, and it's really just a disservice. And I wish that more agents would step up and really talk about how we do business. I mean, the reason that everybody is talking about the MLS is because if you're a member of the MLS, you're guaranteed compensation if you sell that listing. And that's why everybody's like, well, how are we going to get paid? Because that's how you guaranteed your commission. If I sold a listing, I knew I was going to get whatever was offered in the MLS. So now when you take that away, that's where all of these unknowns come in. And unfortunately, they're tying it into other things that, representing a buyer who is already limited on funds, I don't see how it's going to help.
Definitely disadvantage to a buyer for sure.
At risk of you ladies throwing eggs and tomatoes and stuff at me, I'm going to throw a few dissenting opinions out here while agreeing with several of the things. The first thing that I would like to say, we do a lot of online video, so we get a lot of comments from sellers. So I'm not a realtor, I don't represent sellers, but we get a lot of them. We get different feedback than what they say. So what I know about sellers, of having a lot of conversations with these people, is that they care about one thing, which is what their net is. So they care less about what the home sells for, although they do care. They want to have the most expensive, mine's the nicest house, so it should sell for more than any other house in the neighborhood, but They really want to look at that net. So when they hear this, when they see this lawsuit, they go, hey, if I pay less in commissions, that's the biggest line item on my settlement statement. If I pay less in commissions, I'm going to net more. So you go, there are going to be some out there that want to do that. So whether that is in their best interests over the long haul is where the rubber hits the road, because now we say, okay, you want to net more, but now you have narrowed your field of buyers. But when does this matter? We have a very strong seller's market right now. We've done probably 3 episodes of this show in the last 3 years of how do you get a VA offer accepted? And we're saying here right now, we don't even know how your agent is going to get compensated short of the seller having to pay them, which they may not have to for any other type of transaction. So for veteran buyers in the short run, until that is changed, this is a negative. Now for sellers, imagining that they're going to get more by offering less, the market has a way of shaking this out, because
then they have to buy again.
They have to buy again. So if it went that way,
so they're still going to pay.
The only way you come out ahead is if you don't pay the buyer's agent, and then you get your buyer's agent paid for, which is unlikely. But that when it comes back to that net, again, a buyer is going to base that offer off of, hey, do I got to pay this agent, or are they going to pay it? It's going to be accounted for in there, because the buyer is going, hey, what does this cost me? Now, there's a degree, we all know that the buyers are mostly focused on payment. They less care about the price than they care about the payment. So there's going to be an element of, can I get into this house with the funds I have available, and am I comfortable with that payment? So as a result, you could see an increase in net to sellers, but I have never in my life seen a seller go, hey, this is sweet. That 2.5% that I was going to offer to the buyer's agent, I don't have to pay that. So Sarah, when you list it, let's list it for 2.5% less, because I don't have to pay that. They still want the top dollar. So the only pressure that brings prices down is demand for houses. If there's more homes than there are demand for them, that will bring prices down. Whether they have to pay a commission or not, no seller out of the kindness of their heart is going to do it. So where I was going to go, that you ladies may disagree with, Brandy, was it 2014 that we got the TRID guidelines? Was it 2014, 2015 when those came into play?
TRID I don't remember.
Well, the shoe was on the mortgage people's feet at that point.
I want to say 2010 Reg Z.
We were
2010 was
getting a
crazy.
massive change to the way things operated. And everyone thought this is the end of the world. No one's going to be able to make money. No one will want to do loans. They can only go get mortgages from a kid sitting in a computer because no professional will actually take their time doing this. In the grand scheme of things, it ended up being a good thing. I am going to say this change is a good and positive thing. All of the things that we've talked about tonight that are bad, they are bad, but they're bad in the short run until it all gets resolved. So for you watching this, if you're a veteran wanting to buy a home in the next 3 to 6 months, you could be on the wrong side of it, but hopefully you've seen Claudia and Sarah said, here's ways that we can structure it. Here's ways that it can happen. But the market in all senses, the government agencies, FHA, VA, USDA, Fannie, Freddie, they will all adjust to this and will come to a new normal. I do think the transparency is worth it. I think that there is not just on the part of professionals like you guys that have done this as long as you've been in the business, this is how it's been. That is some serious inertia against change, but also on the part of sellers who are really going to be the ones driving this. All buyers would like to get their agent paid for by the seller. Some sellers don't want to pay that. But because it's always been this way for anyone that's ever sold a home before, that's also inertia for it to be similar. So it's going to be more transparent. There's going to be changes. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to fix everything. People will still complain about it and say that it's awful, but it's going to be better than what we had 6 months ago. It just may not be better for 1, 2, 3 years until it all gets worked through.
I think we had a question that had to do with if a seller could pay commission if they were selling by themselves.
And we should have addressed that when we were talking about what a realtor is. Claudia, you want to explain why this would or wouldn't apply to someone selling their own home?
Yeah, this wouldn't apply to somebody selling a home on their own because this is for realtors. So if wherever they're posting their listing or their home for sale, they could certainly offer compensation.
Because it's not going in the MLS, right? This applies to, you can't list compensation in the MLS. Wherever a FSBO, they want to put it on Craigslist, they want to put it on Facebook Marketplace, you want to pay someone to list it somewhere, put it anywhere you want and offer any amount of compensation because you're not a realtor and your house isn't going in the MLS.
Right. And then, I mean, if you find value in offering a commission for someone to bring a buyer to your house, then you should probably think about why it's valuable to have a realtor list your house.
You know, I kind of want to go back to what you said, Josh, and correct me if I'm wrong, though, but weren't those changes to get rid of predatory lending?
They were.
Okay,
100%.
So there's a big difference between predatory lending.
There's some predatory realtors out there
for doing the work. So
exactly. I don't think it's as different as you may think that it is. That we're not saying predatory lending. We're saying there weren't guidelines clearly stating what has to be disclosed and what percentage it can change. So there were incompetent people who couldn't disclose well up front. There were unscrupulous people who didn't disclose up front. Either way, it wasn't as transparent to the buyers as it should have been. And our new system of a loan estimate and a closing disclosure is not perfect, but it corrected a lot of the problems and is better than what we had before. So the comparison is just that there was a system that was suboptimal and it's going to bring things out and make it more clear. Like there is logic to what the DOJ is saying in that we want to decouple these commissions because if you are not directly paying for something, you are very unlikely to negotiate the price for that. So just separating the two brings it into play. Whether it's still being paid by the seller or not, you see that amount. And again, most buyers are not dumb. They're going to see the settlement statement. They can see what that number is. It's not like what agents make has been hidden out there. But when you see it at the very end and it's all been baked into the cake, and we also know, and I'm not saying this is unscrupulous or shady, it's more often dumb or incompetent. We've all heard agents tell a buyer, oh no, my services are free. Oh no, you don't pay me. I get paid by the seller. Technically, it is true. The money comes out of the seller's proceeds, but it is baked into the cake of that transaction. So there's really no two ways around it. I don't see how over the long haul, the transparency can be a bad thing. But when you enforce change in a really short window without a thoughtful process, is going to be painful and suboptimal. I have a feeling 3, 4, 5 years down the line, we'll have a system that you guys will be sitting here smiling and saying, this is better. It's easier. It's an easier and better conversation all the way through, because from a buyer's perspective, they don't even have that conversation. Like the negotiation to them starts when they find a home that they want to make an offer on. Hey, I want to make an offer on that house. Now you guys get to sit down and have a conversation of, I'm going to do this work for you, and I'm earning this money by doing that, and this is what that looks like. I don't see how that can be a bad thing. It may not be fun, it may not be comfortable because we haven't done it that way before, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a bad thing. And the professional agents that I work with, you two are not going to have any problem having that conversation. The dummy that sold one house in their life and doesn't think they're worth anything is going to squirm their way through that conversation and not be able to explain what they do and why it's worth money. My 2 cents.
Agreed. Yeah.
I have to agree with you, Josh. And can I just say, I don't think it'll take 3 or 4 or 5 years. I think by the end of the year, once we have all of the information we need. Again, right now, there's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of going back and forth. What ifs? What about this? And what about that? But once we have real guidelines in place, it's just a matter of executing. And as an industry and as buying consumers and selling consumers, we just need to remember you pivot and you adapt.
We're all just hanging on pins and needles, waiting for the Veterans Administration to just make a statement.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And even if they don't, or until they do, we have a plan for how we're going to move forward, because the market doesn't stop.
VA buyers are going to be taken care of. Yeah.
This is a live market. It's a moving market, and it's not going to stop for the VA. So as professionals, they've really left it on us to figure out how we move forward. And so we've got this.
It is an issue to be aware of. And if you're transacting in the next 3 months, there's going to be a cloud of uncertainty, and you and your agent and your lender will work through it and figure it out. Once this goes into effect in July, we're probably going to have another 3 to 6 months of uncertainty, but the market will adjust. By this time next year, we all should be sitting here happy with a lot more certainty than what we have right now. But we try to keep these to an hour. We've got lots of good information from you guys. Hopefully, again, if you're reading headlines, if you're watching other videos, I'm not saying ignore them. I'm just saying, take what we said with a grain of salt, take what others said with a grain of salt, because no one has certainty. We have a pretty good idea of how this is going to shake out and what we need to be watching for how it shakes out. The important part is, if you are a veteran buyer, you can be more impacted than a non-VA mortgage buyer, and you should get and find who your professionals are early in the process and ask them these questions of what they know in your state with their board of realtors, how that impacts you, and get a plan. It's going to be fine. These ladies did a great job of explaining there's no problem here that can't be solved, but you do need to be aware of it and work at it. So with that, I will let you guys go. We'll be back with another set of pros next week. Brandy, Sarah, Claudia, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and expertise. And I look forward to another conversation in the future with far more certainty.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Thank you.